Hi everybody and welcome to Tales from the Hut and Hangar. This is Volume 4 and Chapter 1 with Mike Laundy. Now this is going to go into 5 chapters because Mike's got so many good stories to tell, and some of these, let's say, mature pilots have got a hell of a lot of stories during their aviation career, and it's very difficult to edit them down to one episode, which is normally what I like to do. But along with Rick's series, this is almost turned into an audio book, so hope you enjoy it. This first one starts with Mike's career with his early flying, going into Austers and Chipmunks and jet Provosts and Gnats, and he ends up on the lovely Victor bomber. Hello, and hello Mike.
Well, hello there.
Right, the first question is going to be your date and place of birth, please, because we like to keep it formal at the start.
Okay, I was born on the 11th of January 1945 in Dalton Manor in Oxfordshire. Which
Oxfordshire, I didn't know that.
It sounds very posh.
Yeah.
But we didn't come from Oxfordshire. Excuse me. The reason being, my mother was living in London at her grandparents' house because it was still obviously during the war, during the Battle of Bulge, actually, I think, when I was born.
Okay.
And London was being hit by V1s and V2s, and the hospitals were pretty full of casualties. So the pregnant women were moved outside the range of the V-bombs to have the children.
So your mum and dad local?
Yes, well, they were both Londoners. My
okay.
mother came from South London, my father came from North London.
All right.
But accommodation was a bit sparse during the war, so they were both living with my grandparents in Catford, in South London.
Oh, Catford. Oh, okay. So what was your first childhood memory of aviation, and what got you hooked and interested in where you ended up with your career?
Well, when I was 5, my father got his first proper house, which was in a little place called Sanderstead in Surrey, in the northern part of Surrey. And we were about one hill across from Croydon Aerodrome, which was the then London Airport.
London Airport, wasn't it, basically?
It was, yeah. And I can remember as a probably 6-7-year-old being taken over there by my father to watch the airplanes and things like Tiger Moths and Rapides.
So that's what got you hooked then?
Well, that gave me my first introduction into it, I suppose. Right. And then in my pre-teens, we had lots of comics in those days. It wasn't very long after the war, and everything was these sort of steely-eyed fighter pilots flying their Spitfire around, and German pilots going Achtung Messerschmitt, sorry, Achtung Spitfire.
Did you
Blitzen.
Did you read like Eagle comics and stuff like
that?
Yes. Yeah, like you do.
As like you did in those days. So that gave me sort of a very sort of
an eye for it.
Enhanced perception of.
So were your parents or anybody in your family related to aviation at all?
Not really. My father did actually try to join the Air Force in 1939.
Oh, okay.
And they gave him a medical and found he had a weak heart and made him unfit for service in any of the forces. So he spent the entire war in London. He was an accountant, well, he was a trainee accountant at that time. And so he volunteered to be an air raid warden. So he wasn't allowed to go into combat duties, but he spent the whole Blitz as an air raid warden with his steel hat on.
Getting bombed.
And sorry, I was going to say, Dad he loved aeroplanes as well.
Oh, right.
And so in the 50s, which was really the height of the British aviation industry.
I always think the 50s are the height.
Oh, yeah.
Jet age.
He would go off to Farnborough and Biggin Hill in particular. They were both.
Drag you along as well, yeah?
Yeah, he did.
Good.
And that was lovely. I can remember one specific occasion. We were at Biggin Hill, and there was a couple of hunters there, and one of them was starting up. We could get quite close, and the pilot started up this hunter. I look at this thing; it's a beautiful-looking airplane. In fact, I got hold of a Matchbox Hunter, which I used to take to school.
See, the hunter comes back into this podcast
it does,
again. It haunts everybody.
But the thing was, the pilot looked directly at me and gave me a thumbs up, and I thought, "Oh, wow!
Oh, cool!" Because I suppose he's like an astronaut in those days.
Well, exactly, yeah,
yeah.
High
esteem.
I do remember when they were trying to break the sound barrier and things, and you would suddenly hear boom, and it would be somebody going down the south coast.
And I suppose living at home, you just saw the stuff going into Croydon as well. So
you did, and at night you could see. In fact, they had flashing lights on the navigation lights. They saw flashing green and red lights.
Do you know what? I've never been there. I must go there because the old building's still there.
Oh, the old building's still there.
With the heron outside, isn't it, on the stilts? I believe. Yeah. I must do it. And I say I'm from Windsor originally. I never actually got round to visit it, but I must do it sometime. So what led you to start your career in aviation then?
Okay.
Did you ever think about what you wanted to do? Were you an adrenaline junkie or just, do you know what I mean?
Not really.
Need for Speed and all that, Tom Cruise?
I quite liked sort of pushing myself a bit. And I joined the Boy Scouts fairly early on, and the group I was at were really good. We used to go rock climbing and canoeing and do all sorts of things. But the real thing which pushed me the aviation way, I think, apart from the fact that the dad had taken me to sort of see airplanes and so on, was when I was around about 12, I got some childhood bug. I was in bed for a few days, and I was given the book Reach for the Sky by Paul Brickhill, which of course is all about Douglas Bader.
Well, that's what inspired Dave as well. Dave
Was it? I didn't know that.
One of his favourite books and films.
And I read that, and I thought, I could do that. And so from then on, I thought, right, I want to be a military pilot.
We got ghosts.
Sounds like you just farted, actually.
It's a pilot creeping by. We'll carry on.
Yes, I decided that I think this is what I want to do. So I started sort of looking towards a way of doing it. And I was sort of, I suppose, I've been 12, 13, 14, around about then. And so I said it to my parents. Well, my mother wasn't too happy. One of her cousins had been killed in the war. Sort of, I think it was a gunner on bombers in North Africa, and got shot down. And of course, in the 50s, there was a very, very high accident rate with things like meteors.
Yeah.
And of course, they all sort of hit the newspapers, and it seemed that weekly they were publishing the guys who'd just been killed flying meteors and other.
Yeah, so I suppose it was rubbed in her face, really. All that.
So, yeah, and of course, she'd been all through the war, and the casualties.
The last thing you want to do is your child to go into that
So,
stuff.
I don't think she was too keen on the idea. Father was quite reasonable about it, and he said, well, how do you want to do it? And I said, well, I've done a little bit of sort of research on it, and I found that with 5 O-levels, I can get in when I'm 17.
Oh.
And he said, I've done some research as well. And with 2 A-levels as well, you can get into Cranwell when you're 18.
Ah.
And he said, I'll agree and support you going if you aim to get the A-levels and aim to go to
that's good,
Cranwell as a Cranwell cadet.
Their support, as it were.
So, so I was getting the support from that end. And by sheer chance, I'd never flown. I'd never been in an airplane. You didn't really go in them very much in the 50s and early 60s. And I was at a scout event, and they were saying, we're going to offer some flights. I thought, I've got to do that. So I said, Dad, look, you're going to have to cough up the money, because it must have cost him nearly £4 for me to go up for half an hour. And it was a Percival Prentice from Biggin Hill.
Oh, right.
And I managed to arrange, there's about 4 of us going up, and I think 3 of them went in the back, and I just let the first 3 get on. And then when I got on, I got the pilot seat and the right-hand seat.
Nicely timed.
And I took a video camera with me. And it was the first time.
You ended up flying that aircraft, didn't you? That aircraft type?
Not the Prentice. No, the Percival Pembroke later on.
Similar, though.
And, of course, the Percival Provost. So I've got several Percival airplanes. And, but, yeah, so I actually filmed my first flight, which is somewhere on 8mm film, which I intend to try and dig out one day
that'd be good.
And copy. So, yes, that was and I just loved it. We've got airborne. I was sort of looking down. I think, this is. I've just got to do this.
I'm going to have some of this.
I've just got to do this. So having had the first flight in the Prentice, I thought, well, I've really, really got to do this. And I thought, how can I do it? Join the Air Training Corps was the obvious way forward. So I suggested this to my parents, and they were sort of iffing and uffing a bit, because I wasn't the strongest guy at scholastic things, because I tended to do other things rather than actually study. Like going rock climbing and canoeing and all sorts of stuff like that. And I remember they said, look, you can join the Air Training Corps, because we know you want to be a pilot, you want to join the Air Force, but not until you've done your O-levels. So I had to wait until I was 16.
Right.
And then I got the required number of O-levels and said, right, I'm going to join the Air Training Corps now. And they couldn't say anything because they'd already agreed. So I joined the Air Training Corps up at Handley Aerodrome, the old Battle of Britain station. And very quickly in there, the officer said, oh, you've got 5 O-levels. That means you automatically qualify as a first-class cadet without even doing the exams. And I was getting a bit of stick from some of the other guys because they'd all been swatting to get the bloody thing. So I said, well, what's the next one up? And he said, well, it's the advanced cadet, but none of the guys here have done it. I said, well, just give me the books. So he gave the books. I went home, read through the books, and it was really interesting. It was all about aerodynamics and stuff, which became useful later. So I did the exam for that, and I got my advanced badge, which shut everybody up there. But
that's good.
And
so that was rewarding then.
And And I explained that, look, I really want to fly, which is one of the reasons I'm here. And they were great. There was a gliding school at Handley, which I did know about because my grandfather lived at the bottom of the hill, and I used to walk up through his garden up to the top when I was younger and watch the gliders going round. And, of course, all open cockpit with instructors shouting instructions from the back seat to go in the front seat, which you could hear quite clearly, from the ground. Shouting, So, when I was 17, I think it was December 1962, not the best time of year to start gliding, but I started a weekend gliding course for the Air Cadets. And
so that was your first solo in a glider then, was it?
So my first solo was on a glider.
Right.
We did the sort of standard course. I looked at the number of hours I did before going solo. It was 2.
2 hours.
But most of the flights were about 2 minutes.
Oh, I see. Just up and down, basically.
2 or 3 minutes. Oh, yeah.
Was that winched up, was it?
You got winched up to about 800 feet and
land.
And just came back and landed. And
well,
so with somebody sort of shouting at the back seat is what to do. I know the very first launch I did, I do remember, because I didn't actually get a briefing before the flight. I just got sat in the front seat, and up we went. And the guy said, right, you've got control. And I thought, I don't know what to do with this. Although I roughly knew what to do. I'd had a couple of flights in Chipmunks as a cadet. And so he said, you've got to pull quite hard because of the weight of the cable, you pulled it quite hard. And so it was working all right. He said, right. What he actually said, which I didn't realise at the time, was pull the release. And I didn't hear what he said. And he said, pull it really hard. So I went, off with the stick, hold the stick back and broke the weak link. And he's going, you idiot, you're pulling the stick back. And I hadn't a clue what I was supposed to be doing, but anyway, we sorted that out on the ground. And it got better from there on.
Right. So going into the powered stuff then?
Well, I put an application in to do a flying scholarship. And at the same time, I applied for a cadetship at Cranwell, and I got awarded both at the same time.
All right.
And so they sent me off to Luton Flying Club.
Yeah.
And this was in September '63, and to do a flying scholarship on Austers. And they had 2 Austers. I'm not sure which mark they were actually. They all started with Alpha A is the first letter, which meant they were 1940s built aeroplanes. So they're pretty old ones, and they had no radios. And at Luton at the time, they were building jet Provosts and test flying them. And they had super constellations flying in on charter.
Doing the charter stuff.
And the only airplanes without radio were these 2 Austers. And so my training in piloting really was flying an airplane with no radio in an airfield which was moderately busy, where I was getting light signals from the tower, and I had to overfly the tower and look down at the signal square and see what all the symbols meant to sort out the circuit and things. So it was really grassroots flying, which has been quite handy.
Yeah, sure it is. Yeah, I mean, that's my first flight was in a Cessna 150 at Luton doing the circuit on a pleasure flight.
Oh, right.
Funny enough.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny, the connection with Percival and the Provost that Paul and Simon are doing here, and also an Auster, which should come full circle again.
Yeah.
Back to that.
So while I was there, I got my A-level results. And I'd started off doing pure maths, applied maths and physics at A-level, which was not a good idea.
Sorry, I nearly fell asleep when you said it.
At the end of my first year of A-levels, it was decided with my tutor that maybe pure and applied as one subject rather than 2 separate subjects would be better. And I was struggling with the physics because the school I'd been going to before that did general science. So I only had a basic physics. And so I failed physics. In fact, I got an O-level pass at physics.
Oh, okay.
And I got that when I was doing my flying scholarship. But at the time, I wasn't supposed to join Cranwell until the following Easter. And I thought, it's time to redo the bloody exams. Oh, and the other little thing which happened around about then was my father had seen an advert in the newspaper for the College of Air Training at Handley, which was BA and BOAC pilots. And he said, why don't you have a look at that? So I did. I applied for that and went down and went through the selection procedure, sat in the interviews, and they said, you've only put down BOAC here. They said, don't you think you should put BA as well, so you've got both chances? I said, no, I don't really want to fly BA. if I get in, then I'd like to do the long haul stuff. Oh, said the BA guy, and the big grin from the BOAC guy. And they were asking me stuff like, how's a jet engine work? Well, I haven't got a bloody clue how a jet engine worked. But they did.
What was
accept
your
me.
inkling of flying then? Did you think, fast jets, or I just want to fly?
Oh, it hadn't even crossed my mind. I had no idea.
A journeyman of flying, really.
Yeah, I wanted to fly, but I didn't really think it through to what the end was going to be. And BOC did accept me as a cadet, and they offered me a cadetship the following year, and that also needed 2 A levels.
Oh, okay.
Well, when I was still on my flying scholarship, I got a letter from the Air Ministry, as it was then, asking me if I would start at Cranwell that October. Was it October? I think it was October, the end of September, something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, they don't know I've only got 1 A level, because the printout which came out, the O had badly printed. It looked like a C, and which was a pass. And I knew damn well I hadn't got a C. And just as an aside, a few weeks ago, I flew Air Marshal Black Robinson, and he was also at Crown with me. He got a little bit higher up the rank structure than I did.
Did you confess to him, did you?
And he confessed to me. He also got a
brilliant.
with 1 A level.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And we believe a few more guys got it.
A bunch of chances.
Yeah, and it showed that you really needed A levels to fly an aeroplane. Not.
No,
so then from then on, I joined the Air Force in sort of 1963.
Yeah, right.
Well, I got my travel warrant to go up to Cranwell. My parents took me to the railway station. I'm just trying to think when I went from King's Cross, I think it was, to go up to Grantham. And I was highly embarrassed because my mother was in tears when she was saying goodbye, because I think she thought she was going to see me again.
Mum quite proud of you at this point, thinking, oh, okay, you can make a go at this, and she accepted it more, or
she'd accepted it, but she was very concerned for my safety.
It's good flying there. Well, the stories you're going to tell,
yes, she probably had good concern there. So off I went, arrived at Grantham, then we got picked up from the railway station, taken to the college, and had afternoon tea when we got there.
More civilised.
No, it wasn't civilised, because what I thought was chocolate spread, which I put thickly on my toast, turned out to be Marmite.
Oh, no.
And for my first week at Cranwell, I had the taste of Marmite in my mouth, being occasionally regurgitated. And I can honestly say I've never had Marmite since.
I just wondered about that.
And anyway, the next day we were inducted into the Air Force, and we had to go. We wandered up to the main college there with our sergeant, and he sort of, "Come on, gentlemen, we'll just go up here." And we had to swear that all the good stuff, to be loyal to the Queen and the various governments we were going to come under in later years. And then we came out, and it was going, right, double. Next thing, oh God, we're doubling back.
Stuff,
yeah, and we had a pretty heavy boot camp for about the first 3 months, and it was
didn't put you off
quite hard. No, it didn't put me off. I managed to get major restrictions for almost a month, because we would occasionally have formal dining in nights. And in the early days, we hadn't got our full mess kit at that stage, so we'd be wearing our number 1 uniforms with a bow tie, and it was called interim mess kit. And the first one we went to, one of these, then in fact, wasn't the first few months. The next entry had just come in, because it was getting a bit bloody boring. And one of the guys suggested, why don't we go into Lincoln to see our girlfriends? Because by that time we discovered that there was a teachers' training college in Lincoln, which had a considerable number of newborn females. And so we did. We nipped into Lincoln, still in our interim mess kit, which we thought would be a bit of posing. Trouble was, we weren't actually allowed to do that. And we got caught by the senior entry, who were a bit like prefects at school, and they snitched on us. And I'd also pranged my car just over a week before that, because
what was your car then?
Jaguar.
That's it. It goes with the job title, doesn't it? Jaguar.
It was a 2.4 litre Jaguar. Yes, it's quite a nice car actually. And
brilliant.
I wanted to go to London. I had a different girlfriend at the time, not the one from the Lincoln Training College. There was a girlfriend I'd actually met on my first leave, who was the cousin of one of my good friends at Cranwell. And I started dating that lady. And I found there was a great line for inviting girls to go flying. It was a case of, would you like me to take you up in an airplane flying? And it cost me £4.50 to rent an Auster for an hour.
Oh, okay.
Take this young lady. Yeah, but I was only earning £20 a month.
Oh, right, okay.
And I had a £12 a month mess bill to pay. But anyway, by that time, we'd gone different ways, and I had another lady I was interested with up in Lincoln. And we got caught by the senior entry, and we were reported. And so the next thing is, I'm in front of my flight commander. And I'd already had a slight problem a couple of weeks before when I sort of had a Jaguar car, as one does in those days. And I wanted to go to London to see my grandmother, who wasn't very well. And I got a couple of the other guys to come with me to help pay for the petrol. And we went, there was a very straight road between Cranwell and sort of Grantham, called Ancaster Strait. It's an old Roman road. I did remember overtaking a couple of cars, which wasn't difficult, so I was doing 120. And I got to Spittlegate Crossroads and pranked it. So I didn't see the car going across in front. I didn't hit it very hard. I just knocked the driver door off, the passenger door off.
Oh, and, you're lucky in some ways.
And lucky I didn't hurt the lady and her child who were inside it. But our sergeant came along while I was leaning on the bonnet chatting to the policeman. So I wasn't really going to keep it under covers. And so now a couple of weeks later, then I put on a charge for being in Lincoln in interim mess kit, contrary to Cadet Wing standing orders, drive my car on a Friday contrary to Cadet Wing standing orders, leading a member of junior entry astray, and driving without due care and attention.
Oh, crikey.
And I can remember this very serious flight commander we had, a guy called Hardwick. And he looked at me when I came in and he said, "A lot of people are trying to get into this place, so you seem to be doing your damnedest to get out. My powers of punishment insufficient. You're remanded to the squadron commander." So I was marched in front of the squadron commander, who was a guy, Squadron Leader LeBrock was his name, an ex-Lightning pilot. And he was trying very hard not to smile when he heard the charge. And he thought it was quite amusing, and then gave me 28 days, major restrictions. And major restrictions meant that you had to wear a white belt all day long to show your major restrictions, which meant you couldn't use any of the public rooms of the mess other than for a meal. You had to get up at some horrible hour in the morning, and you were drilled by the senior entry on the parade square in
great fun.
With a rifle and blue webbing. And then at 6 o'clock in the evening, you had another inspection and more bloody drill on the parade square. And at 10 o'clock at night, it was number 1 uniform with white webbing. And, of course, any little mark in the webbing, and they gave you another day. Or if you had a little bit of Duraglit inside you, because we had brass buttons, so there's a bit of Duraglit inside your button, you got another day.
Oh, great.
And it went on and on and on. And after sort of about a month, they took pity on me. And, incidentally, that particular flight lieutenant, I never met again after I left there until towards the end of my career, when I was at Finningley on the standard squadron there on the jet stream. The phone rang one day, and he said, "Oh, is that the Mike Laundy who went to Cranwell?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, this is Group Captain Hardwick." And he said, "Whatever happened to your career? I see you're still a flight lieutenant." And I said, "I'll put that a different way than sir. When was the last time you flew an aeroplane?" He said, I don't know, years ago, I don't know. I said, "I've just got out of one. Nothing went wrong with my career." And then he put the phone down. Anyway, back to Cranwell. So Cranwell was interesting. We did an awful lot of parades and drill, and we got pretty good at it. And you sort of accepted it. We had a haircut every week, whether we needed it or not. And if you didn't, then you were in trouble and you got put on another charge again. They seemed to quite like putting you on charges, really, particularly in the junior entry, to try and get you into the Air Force sort of way of discipline. And we were in an interim course because they were just changing the system slightly there. So instead of starting to do our formal flying at the beginning of our second year, we had to wait until we were halfway through our second year. It was a 3-year course. But they did give us Chipmunks to fly. Oh, right. And so every week we would get one afternoon allocated to go to the North Airfield there to fly the Chipmunk, which was great fun. And I had a lovely master pilot instructor in the Chipmunk who drove Spitfires in the Second World War. Oh, crikey. And he was a great guy. But at the end of my first year, they thought I had A-level maths and physics, which I didn't. And I didn't do terribly well on the academic side. And they said, well, you're not doing very well on this academics. And I admitted that I only had a fail at physics. And I remember the guy saying, oh, God, you're not supposed to be here. Well, we spent too much money on you now. You can continue. And they put me into a rather easier set for academics. So I went from what was the A1 set to the A2 set for academics, which was a bit easier. But I discovered that I had a private study period in the afternoon when the A1 set were doing chipmunk flying. So I used to pitch up and do chipmunk flying with the set I had before and with my own set.
So you got plenty of flying in.
So I got about a third more chipmunk flying than the rest of the guys on my course.
Well, it's all good experience, isn't it, I suppose?
I also joined the gliding club there and sort of fairly quickly went solo on gliders, and every weekend I'd fly gliders for part of it. So it made it a bit more difficult seeing my girlfriend in Lincoln, but one has to get one's priorities right.
So how long were you at Cranwell for then?
It was a 3-year course, and eventually we started flying the jets. And that was quite an eye-opener, flying Jet Provost for the first time.
Okay.
In fact, it was lovely. I do remember the first time I tried to taxi a Jet Provost, I was zigzagging from side to side because it was differential braking. Where the Chipmunk, you just used the rudders and you put a few clicks on the handbrake. But the Jet Provost, you had your rudders with the brakes on the top. I don't know why I'm doing hand signals here, nobody can probably see me.
Right, okay.
And of course my right foot, which was used to braking in a car, controlled it beautifully. The left foot declutched on it. So it was a bit of a sort of rather ragged taxiing until I got the hang of it, but you get the feeling of it. And and it was an intensive course. It was hard going, but I went to Spittlegate, I think it was, which was a satellite field, to do my first solo. Well, I didn't know I was going to do the first solo, and so I was there, and the instructor said, right, that's enough, I'm getting out. Off you go, yeah. Off you go, yeah. And I can remember taxiing out in this aeroplane and thinking, wow, and there were cars parked on the side of the road there, sort of watching, and I got it airborne, and there was this vibration. I think, God, what's that? And in fact, I probably had yawed a bit as I was taking off, and I got the nose wheel vibrating, and as it retracted, it was going in the undercarriage bay. And of course, in my mind, I thought, God, what's gone wrong? But anyway, that was okay. And I can remember looking across at the seat next to me, which has got a canvas cover over it, where it'd been solo. I think, I really am flying this all by myself. And I came in and landed, which was fine. You just did one circuit. As I'm taxiing back, there's all people looking. So I open the hood, and I'm giving a casual wave, as you do, as you go by. And I sort of casually put my arm over the side and nearly lost my flying glove into the intake, which is just... So that was my first solo, and it got better from then on.
Hopefully.
So, so we went through the course, and
that's good.
I suppose it's towards the end of the course I can think about most, because there's a couple of things happened there. For your final handling test, you had to demonstrate a reasonable prowess at aerobatics. And bear in mind, you have about 100 hours on the jet by then, so you didn't have a huge number of hours flying. You had to fly an aerobatic display, but using 10,000 feet as a pretend ground level. Well, my instructor had this great idea of what would be really impressive for probably the chief instructor who would be doing the exam. And he said, do an inverted stall turn. I don't know if you know what a stall turn is, but a stall turn, you go up to the vertical, and as it slows down, you put the rudder on, you drop it over the side, and you go back the other way. But the inverted ones was you turned upside down, pushed like a maniac, and went inverted into the vertical, did the stall turn, and then pushed it out of the stall turn afterwards. It was not a comfortable manoeuvre. He said, but if you do this to him, he'll probably pass you on it because he won't want you to do it the second time. Because you're dangling your seat straps, the blood coming up to your head, and your head feeling that it's going to explode. So anyway, we did it a couple of times. It worked all right. And there's one thing which he said, when you're pushing it out, remember to trim fully nose down. Otherwise, you can't get the nose underneath when you're pushing it out from the stall turn. So he said, well, go and practice. So I went up by myself, went up to, I don't know, about 12,000 feet, and try one of these. I pushed it up, stall turned it, pushed it out, and it wouldn't recover. And I was going down inverted, and I couldn't get the nose back to the horizon because I'd forgotten to trim it forward. And so I rolled it the right way up and pulled. Well, by that time, it was doing probably 250, approaching 300 knots in the dive in the Mark IV JP, probably about 250. And I rolled it the right way up and pulled. and I lost consciousness because I went from something like minus 2.5 G to about plus 5 G instantly without bracing myself for it, and I passed out. And I can remember coming to, and I could see sort of blurred clouds through the windscreen coming sort of straight up towards me, and I just kept saying to myself, I've got to get the nose up, and pulled and went out again, and came to again, and the clouds were at a slightly better angle. Went out for the third time when I pulled. When I came on that time, I was almost level, and I managed to get the nose up to the horizon, and I just sat there for nearly 5 minutes while everything gradually came back to normal. Oh, God. And I started reacting normally. And I looked at my altimeter, and I was at 5,000 feet. Yeah. So I didn't actually tell anybody about that. Perhaps I should have done, but I didn't. And I think
But you learned that from it.
I learnt from it. Not enough, because the next practice I did, I'd worked out a complete aerobatic sequence, which I was going to do, and I was going to finish it up with an upward roll to the inverted and fly away from the assumed display line inverted. Now, the jet Provost only had a limited amount of fuel for inverted flying, and it was about 22 seconds, as I recall, something like that. And so I'd been practicing this, and I got the habit of counting. And I must have counted slowly on that occasion, because as I was flying away inverted, the engine flamed out. Oh, it ran out of the fuel from the collector tank that was inverted. So I thought, I knew what had happened. And I thought, right, roll it the right way up. What I was supposed to do was to close the throttle and then hit the hot relight button. I forgot one little thing. I forgot to close the throttle. So I rolled it the right way up. And I'm pouring fuel into the jet pipe behind me, and I hit the relight button, and there's and in the rearview mirror, I saw this burst of flame come out the back of the aeroplane, and the engine relit. So when I came back and landed, I said, "Oh, by the way, I had a flame up." I sort of, "What? You had a flame up? You didn't put out a panel?" "Well, no, I just." So everyone is leaping around, and they said, "The instructor's got to go up and check that airplane, and you really should have put out a panel after you relit it and done a precautionary landing somewhere." I said, "But I'd flown it upside down too long. I knew what the problem was." Anyway, I didn't get into trouble over that, and they said the airplane's fine. No, right. But I didn't mention the slight sort of explosion we had in the jet pipe.
So at that point, do you have any idea where your path was going, or any inkling of where they wanted to send you? Or
we were asked, as I recall, if we wanted to go onto big aeroplanes or onto fighter type aeroplanes. And in those days, the Air Force subdivided you at the end of your basic training, which is where I was at. You were subdivided into pistons or jets, and I wanted to go jets, and they accepted that, and they sent me off to Valley to fly the Gnat. So that was my next task. So yeah, I went to Valley. Before I got to Valley, I managed to marry the girl I'd been going up with in Lincoln. And we got to Valley. We managed to rent ourselves a little sort of a bungalow, not too far from the airfield. And my wife actually, her maiden name was Bronwyn Thomas, which was quite handy to have a Welsh name in Anglesey, because she then got a job teaching at one of the local schools.
Oh, that's good.
And but she needed the car, so I got myself a moped, and I used to go into work on the moped, which was, in those days, security wasn't very high around our airfields, and I could go down from Rosniger, the village I was in, across the bridge over the little river there, and then in through one of the crash gates and around the Perry track and onto the grass if a jet was coming the other way to taxi and take off. I could get there quite quickly, until I discovered that if you had a spring high tide, you couldn't do that, because either side of the bridge was flooded. You couldn't get down to it.
Oh.
So, but yeah. So go on. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the Gnat like, and squadron life sort of thing?
It was quite frightening for a young guy. Well, for me anyway.
I suppose going from what you were flying before to that.
Yeah, it was a bit different. It was quite a beast. It was very powerful for a little airplane. I think we got to 40,000 feet in something like, I think it was about 7 minutes to 40,000 feet, whereas the jet Provost would get to 30,000 feet in about half an hour, if you're lucky. And so it got up to height pretty quickly. It came down pretty quickly when you were gliding. It had a hydraulic system where the instructor in the back seat could switch off the hydraulics in the back, and you'd be flying along quite happily, and all of a sudden you got a hydraulic failure. which was a bit trickier than that, because you had to get the airplane within a certain speed range and then unlock the elevators, because at the back end of it had an all-flying tailplane, and the elevators were locked to the tailplane. But if you lost the hydraulics, then the tailplane was going to freeze as you lost all the accumulated pressure. And you unlocked the tailplane to fly it, and you had to be in a certain speed range, otherwise you're going to have trouble landing it. And then when you came into land, you had a couple of switches down at the side, which you push forward to nose down, pull them back for nose up. And you're putting these huge movements in with the stick to control it, and you actually motored your tailplane up and down and corrected it with the elevators with the stick to get the thing into the right position for landing. But also, your landing gear retracted rearwards and came down forwards. And so if you did nothing else, when the gear went down, you went into a dive, and so you had to rapidly trim the nose up. And the real fun thing was when you did a go around with the gear down, you retracted the wheels, then the nose would start pitching up. And if you didn't do anything, the airplane would just rear up in the sky and probably stall and kill you. And so the way we got out of it was you rolled it to about 60 degrees of bank, and you went screaming around in a turn around the middle of the airfield while you're floundering around trying to find the bloody switch to get the elevators back down again. And that came back to me years and years later as an airline pilot, when in the simulator, when I was doing my command assessment, I wouldn't like to call it swear about the guy in the back, but he wasn't a very nice guy in the back. Yeah. He gave me a problem as I've rotated in a 737, and the problem he gave me was that it didn't matter what I did with the stick, I couldn't get the nose down. If I moved the stick back, the nose went up a bit more, but it wouldn't go down. Right. So in other words, the tailplane would only go in one direction, which was to pitch me nose up. And it was rapidly coming towards the stall, and I was getting stall warnings going off inside the simulator. Sorry? Pre-max, yeah. And it's going stall, stall, stall. And you've got these things which are called the feathers, which come down on the attitude indicator and show you when you're going to hit the stall. And it suddenly came back to... And I was trying, I couldn't push the stick, didn't do anything. The trim didn't work on the stick. I suddenly remember what happened to the Gnat. So I just rolled it to about 70 degrees of bank. And then, in fact, I let the nose drop down to get the speed back up again, and then just went around in circles and glided up to 15,000 feet, flying around in circle, while I'm trying to work out how the hell I was going to fly this thing. I thought there's got to be a way out. And in the end, I tried the autopilot, and I found the autopilot had a different system going through, and the autopilot would fly it. And then I could fly it, turn the autopilot up and down and fly it back again. And I basically got told off by the guy in the back saying it took me far too long to work out how to do it. And I spoke to the other guys and said, yeah, we all crashed it. So anyway, that's the side, but they'd come from the Gnat. But first flight in the Gnat, the instructor said, it was a demonstration, he was flying. He said, right, you've got control. And I was sort of rocking from side to side. It was so sensitive in roll. And he said, push the stick across and see what happens. Well, the world just rotated in front of me because it had an incredibly rapid rate of roll.
What was the main aerobatic aircraft, wasn't it?
It was at the time, yeah. But it was, the low flying was great fun because we used to be doing 420 knots at 250 feet-ish. Cool. And going through the Welsh mountains. And
so were you stationed anywhere else after that? Did you go follow the aircraft, go anywhere else?
No. It was purely advanced training.
Right.
And we did about 70 hours on the Gnat. And then at the end of that, then we got our postings. And the particular course I had been on was a mixture of ex-Cranwell and ex-University Air Squadron. And we had a fair number of pilots on our course from Cranwell, and so they said, you're going to go on 2 courses at Valley. Half would go on the first course, half on the second course. And it was split at the letter L. So A to L went on the first course, and M to Z went on the second one. And I, by surname being L, I was on the first course. So half Cranwell, half University Air Squadron. And at the end of it, we were called in for our postings. And we were asked what we wanted to do, and I'd applied for Canberras, PR9 Canberras specifically. I'd had a go at flying those during one of my leaves from Cranwell. Oh, right. And I thought, this is a lovely airplane. I thought, I don't know about fighters. But the PR9 Canberra was great, because you had a navigator to do all the work, and you could just fly it around as far as I could see anyway. Yeah,
from that point.
And it was going to be in German as well. Oh, okay. And, but anyway, I got called in by the squadron commander, and he said, we recommended you for Canberras. He said, but the powers that be have decided that the ex-university guys who got shorter service commissions than yours, because you're into the age of 38. They should have the fun postings.
No.
So I'm afraid you're going to go onto V1s, onto Victors, which was not what I wanted.
Ah.
And I think there was about 3 of us went off to V-bombers. And so that then started the next part of my flying career.
Your career, nice one.
Yeah. There's one other thing I probably ought to say about that. Towards the end of my course, we would go up and we would fly solo aerobatics in it. But at Valley, they only had a radar for doing approach to the runway, not for the local area. And so if we wanted to do aerobatics, we'd tell them, and they'd say we'd use the overhead, the Llyn Peninsula, the little pointy bit in the top of Wales, south of Anglesey. And they would keep it down to a maximum of 2 airplanes in that general area. So by random, you should be okay. And so I called up that I was going to go to the Llyn to do aerobatics, which was approved by air traffic, and I was told there's one other aircraft in. And I had a good look around, couldn't see him anywhere. And I decided I was going to do a half loop with a roll off the top, which was quite fun, because if you went in around about 10,000 feet, you needed around about 420 knots, as I recall, 450 knots, something like that, to get it up to the top with enough speed to roll it out without it spinning.
Right.
And just as I got the speed up to start putting back, I met the other Gnat come the other way doing the same manoeuvre. So we had a closing speed of somewhere in the region of 1,000 miles an hour.
Oh, good grief.
The Gnat is tiny. We were on a perfect collision course with each other. In fact, we didn't collide. We missed by, we both reckoned it was about something like 15 feet.
Good grief.
Absolutely square head on. And it wasn't a case of seeing an airplane coming towards me. It exploded into my face. It went from being a little tiny speck on the windscreen. Within
So quick, yeah.
a fraction of a second, there was a full view of a Gnat coming to my face, and I thought I was dead. And it's easier to talk. It takes longer talking about it than the actual feeling at the time.
I can imagine, yeah.
But I can remember the feeling. It stayed with me forever, really, after that. And interestingly, it wasn't one of fear. It was a feeling of being pissed off. Like, this shouldn't be happening now.
Yeah.
But in the time it takes me to say that, it was over.
Yeah, yeah.
But one little thing which struck me after that was I've never really been afraid of anything since then, because I thought, well, on that day, I looked death in the face, and it didn't worry me. And I thought, I can cope with that.
Crikey.
So it's strange, isn't it? It was just
I can imagine how quick that was. Just
it was so fast, and it's such
blink.
a jolt to your psyche, when it happens.
Yeah, a microsecond, isn't it?
It's literally a microsecond, yeah. And I met the other guy, and we had a couple of beers later in the bar.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
We didn't put an air miss report, though, because we were both students, and we thought we might get into trouble.
Oh, lesson learned, and lucky escape then.
Yeah, so that was a lucky escape. So the next job then was to fly the Victor. I didn't have a course immediately. I had about 3 months through the summer to wait for the course. My wife came from the Blackpool area, and so my parents-in-law said, well, we could live with them for the time being, and I managed to get myself a little task flying Chipmunks out of Woodvale, flying air experience flights, taking cadets up, which was great fun. So I spent the summer doing that. They had plenty of reserve officers flying them at weekends, so they had Monday and Tuesdays off each week. I had the weekend off as well anyway, because they didn't need me then. Oh. So basically I had a 3-day week flying Chipmunks and 4 days off. Back to the
Chipmunk again, yeah.
Back to the Chipmunk again. Well, it did keep recurring through my career, actually. And if you ever want to know what my favourite airplane was, it has to be the Chipmunk.
Oh, that's a question for later.
Yeah. Oh, it's a question for later.
But I thought it sounds like it is.
Yeah, I just love the little Chipmunk. Anyway, then I headed off to the V-Force, and I was posted to 139 Jamaica Squadron at where was it? Wittering. At Wittering. I had to go to places. I think it was Lindholm I went to first of all, where we had to learn about the Blue Steel. The Blue Steel was our bomb, which we were going to be carrying. It was a nuclear bomb, of course. And what I do remember is driving into Lindholm, which was the bombery, whatever you call it, school at the time. They had one of the really big Barnes Wallis bombs mounted outside on a plinth. As you went in, it looked very impressive. Some places have airplanes. This one had a big bomb there. Yeah. About 10 years later, when they went to take it down, they found it was still live.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, good. That's a big error.
Yeah, it was a bit, yeah. So anyway, we learnt about the bomb then, and it was an interesting thing, because The Blue Steel was a rocket. It was based on German Second World War rocketry, more or less the same stuff that powered the Comet, the German fighter during the Second World War. They lost quite a lot, did the Germans, when the rocket fuel exploded. And we were a bit concerned about it doing that because it was horrible bloody stuff. It was called high test peroxide. It was very volatile. To make the rocket work, we had a tank of HTP, as we called it, and a tank of kerosene, and with pumps which squirted the two together, and there was spontaneous combustion when they mixed. I think they actually had a silver screen they put it through, which acted as a catalyst and helped. But it was just spontaneous combustion from this, and the way it went. They showed us films of it. They put a small cupful on a concrete block, and it fizzed for about 10 seconds and came out the bottom of the block as it dissolved it all the way through. God. They put a teaspoonful on a wig of human hair, which after about 2 seconds was aflame because the oil in the hair reacted with it and burst into flames. But a little bit more of that later because I became more intimately acquainted with the stuff later on the aeroplane.
Well, no doubt I will mention it to people who are listening that we'll probably do one on the Victor, I think, because it's such a big area and an interested aircraft for a lot of people, I think, really. But what was it like going from the Gnat and the Chipmunk up to a bloody great bomber then? It must have been overwhelming, or the thought of it, or...
It was big.
Yeah, I know.
When I first got into it. And the big thing I noticed, I think, when I was doing the conversion onto it, was how sluggish it was compared with what I'd been flying. And I know the first attempt I had at landing the runway just didn't work because the runway was slightly off to one side. So I moved the controls to bank it across the runway, and it felt like bugger all happened. And then the nose would start coming across. I think it's there now. Straighten it up, and I go through, and I'll be out the other side of the runway. And you had to anticipate a lot.
Like a barge.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, you had a lot of inertia with the airplane. But once you got used to that, it was a very nice airplane in many respects. And we had sort of 8-wheel bogies on each side, which were tilted up. And so you knew if you'd done a good landing because you could feel the rear part of the bogie land and then the front part of the bogie land. If you did a hard one, you crunch, they all came down together. But the acceleration was phenomenal when he went off. I think it was something like 0 to 150, I think took about 12 or 13 seconds, something like that. You actually slammed back in your seat when he went.
Flying.
I know later on one of our rear crew went off onto the Victor tankers, which at the time were Mark 1s, and it was the Mark 2s we were flying, and they had half the power. And I saw him afterwards, and he said on his first takeoff in the Victor, in the Victor tanker, he did what he did in the Victor 2, which was to brace himself against the seat, against the table in front, because the navigators only had lap straps in the back. And if you didn't, in the 2, you were spread-eagled across the table as it accelerated.
Oh, blimey.
And he said, but in the Victor 1, he braced himself, and he said, the other 3 guys said, what are you doing?
Cool, the performance was that different? It was.
And the Victor 2, actually, with our normal operating wakes, we could get to 40,000 feet in 7 minutes, the same as the Gnat.
Great.
It was phenomenal.
It's a lot of grunt.
It was a lot of grunt. You came off the ground, and you didn't see anything other than blue sky, assuming it was a nice day, until you were through the mid-20s on the way up, because to keep the speed under control, we were limited to 300 knots maximum at low level, or below 10,000 feet, and so you'd be climbing really steep angle as you came up. And they had a strange sort of attitude indicating though, called the MFS, which stood for Military Flight System. We knew it as the Mystery Fright System. And normally on an artificial horizon or attitude indicator, you've got a horizon line which moves up and down according to what you're doing, and that shows your horizon. Well, on this, because you had so much nose-up pitch when you came off, you wouldn't have seen any of it. It would have been right down the bottom of the gauge. And so the horizon line was exactly across the middle, and that showed you where your bank was. And your pitch was a separate piece in the middle of the instrument which moved up and down.
Oh, okay.
And you had a little knob you could twiddle around, and you could set your ideal pitch attitude before you took off. And I can't remember all the figures now, but I think it was something around about sort of 20 odd degrees, maybe 25 degrees. It was a very high pitch attitude. And you rotated it, you just kept it rotating until the middle one got up there, and then the side bit showed you your bank angle. And if you looked out the window, all you saw was sky. You couldn't see the ground. You couldn't see the horizon under the nose.
So, you were Wittering, were you, for this?
I was at Wittering, yeah.
Where did you go from there? You obviously travelled a lot with
the aeroplane. We used to go out to Goose Bay on occasions. Of course, our job basically was to go nuke the Russians.
Yeah.
And out in Goose Bay, the terrain was very similar over northern Russia to terrain. Sorry, over northern Canada, very similar to terrain over Russia. And so we go and practice out there. And in theory, we were supposed to not go below 500 feet. It was a bit noisy, the airplane, especially when flying around the UK. In practice, we tended to go a bit lower over Canada, to the extent that the navigator would look. We had a periscopic sextant in the back, and he could stick the periscope up, look out the back, and see us blowing the snow up behind us.
Good grief. But, exciting stuff.
But I'll save some of the Victor stories for later on. Suffice it to say that I was only on the bomber for about 18 months, and then the first Polaris submarine went on station, and they disbanded our squadron 139 and also 100 squadron, which
I suppose it made it a bit obsolete then with the Polaris.
To be honest, we weren't too sorry about that.
No.
It was a nice airplane to fly. I didn't particularly want to go and nuke anybody. We'd have done it, if we had to go, we'd have had to go. But it wasn't a thing which...
I didn't realise the time frame was that short, actually. I thought you were on it a few years, basically.
Well, that wasn't the end of my time in the Victor.
Okay.
Because I thought, I'm going to escape the V-Force now and go and do something more interesting. Well, not so much more interesting, but maybe I'll get my cameras now. And they said, no, you're going to go to Whitton, which is just down the road, and fly the reconnaissance version of the Victor and finish off your ground tour. Not your ground tour, finish off your flying tour.
Yeah.
So it's a 3-year flying tour. So I moved down and went on 543 Squadron, which... same aeroplane, except we had an extra fuel tank in the bomb bay and a complete mass of cameras in the bomb bay, so we could do horizon to horizon photography.
So you didn't go to refuelling then or anything? When they
No, I never did refuelling. So I just flew the strategic reconnaissance and the bomber.
So where'd you go from after Victor's then?
Okay, well I finished my Victor tour, and I thought, right, now what am I going to do? And I got called down to what was by then the Ministry of Defence to see my desk officer. And he said, old chap, good career job for you next. Flight commander at Locking. I said, what? I said, it's my second tour. Yes, he said, but after the various governmental cuts, like getting rid of TSR2, he said, we've trained a lot of pilots, we don't have any aeroplanes from them. So we're giving second tourists ground tours. Not all. Dave Lindy got away with it, but I didn't. And so I thought, oh God, I don't want to do a ground tour. So I immediately put an application in to go to the Central Flying School as an instructor. And that went through the system. It came back. I got a nice little letter from the Central Flying School saying, yes, you're perfectly acceptable to us, but you're still going to do your ground tour.
So you still had to do it.
It was a case of, we'll call you. And so off I went to Locking for my next job. And as sod's law again, I was told, we're expanding slightly, so you're starting your own flight here. You're not taking one over, which is already running. So you've got a sergeant and a corporal. So I had two lovely guys, actually, Sergeant Carini and Corporal Baldridge, who were both excellent NCOs, and me. And I was told, and you're shortly going to have 120 apprentices between the ages of 15 and 22. And I think I was about 23.
Crikey.
And so, yes. And so between myself and the NCOs and chatting to the other guys, we managed to get some sort of organisation going for when they arrived. And so that was would have been in the early summer of 1970. I just had my first son as well, so Christopher, my firstborn, was born 2 weeks before I went down to Locking. But I managed to get a house down there anyway, and so my family came down and joined me. And I found very quickly that the only flying I could guarantee at Locking was gliding. And there's a RF gliding school, or RFGSA, Gliding Soaring Association school at Western Sumer Airfield.
Yeah.
So I went along to that straight away, and within a year, in fact within a month, I was off to Ricey gliding because the guy that was doing didn't want to do it, wasn't interested in gliding as I was. And within a year, I'd been to Bicester and done a gliding instructor's course.
Oh, right.
And finished up as a full category gliding instructor.
So back to gliding again. Yeah.
So I was back to gliding again. And then I was sniffing around for chipmunks. I found the chipmunks were at Filton doing the air experience flying. So I went up to Filton, introduced myself to the boss of the air experience flight there. He said, "Oh, great." He said, let's go and take a chipmunk up. So you get on. So we got on this chipmunk and we went and we did all the general handling stuff. Oh, that's fine. So just take me back to Filton. Filton's got a very long runway and a very wide runway. And he said, for heaven's sake, don't land at the start of the runway, otherwise we're going to be taxiing for half an hour.
Miles, yeah.
Get down there. So I thought, okay, I'll land at least halfway down the runway. So I aimed to land halfway down the runway, but what I hadn't sussed out was it's a wide runway. And so the perspective was wrong. And I, coming down, I didn't look at my altitude, I'm just looking at the runway. The runway, instead of meeting me, just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I had to go around.
That's something to a lot of pilots, isn't it?
Because I'd run out of runway. And the guy in the back was killing himself laughing. He said, "You realise Filton is the longest runway in the country and you've just missed it."
Well done.
So, yeah, slightly embarrassed by that. I also took one of my fellow flight commanders up. I said, "Come on," he had pilot's wings. I said, "You really ought to come do some flying." I said, "Oh, all right." So he came up with Filton. We borrowed a Chipmunk. And I did the takeoff and I gave him control on the back, so he was flying it around, which was fine. So I came back and I said, "Well, you can do the landing." And he didn't say anything. He had to go out doing the landing and ground looped us. We did a complete ground loop when we touched down. And as it started to go, I tried to stop it. It was too late. And I said to him, "What were you doing?" And he said, "Well, you do realise I've never flown a Chipmunk before." And I thought everybody flew Chipmunks. He said, "No, I was one of the first to do all through jet training. I've never flown a light aircraft." So when it started to swing as he was landing, then his instinctive reaction was to dab on a brake pedal which wasn't there.
This is at Filton?
Sorry?
This is at Filton, yeah?
It's at Filton, yeah.
So you're not had much luck at Filton, really?
Not really, no, but I don't think anybody actually saw us do it, and we didn't do any damage. We just did a complete pirouette of the runway and carried on taxiing and came in. So I have actually had 2 ground loops in my life. The other one was a few years later, and again I wasn't flying the airplane. So yeah, that was Filton. We used to get Varses came in occasionally to Filton to fly the apprentices, give them some experience. And so when that happened, and it was my flight, then I used to scrounge the right hand seat of the Varsity and do some Varsity flying. So yeah, I did a fair bit of flying. The station commander at Locking had pilot's wings, and he was an engineer, but the Air Force had a phase where they trained a few engineers to be pilots. And so I said to him, "Look, so you really ought to come have a go on the glider sometime." And I clocked up my 1000th glider flight at Locking.
Wow.
When I was there, and the station commander decided this should go in the RF News or something, so he decided to come along, and so we have a picture, and I said, "Well, I'll take you up." And so he climbed into the left-hand seat, because I was instructing in the glider by then, and off we went in a T-21 open cockpit side-by-side glider, and I did the launch, and I gave him control at the top, and he was flying it okay, and we'd got quite a good launch. I think we got, 1,500 feet, something like that. And I said, "I want you to dive it." So he pushed the stick forward a bit. I said, "No, dive it really, really hard." And I said, I want to see the speed coming up towards 90 knots. So he's just, eventually got the nose down, and he said, "Now what?" I said, "Now pull it back." He said, "What are we doing?" I said, "We're looping the loop." He didn't pull it back hard enough. So we went over the top of the loop and just hung there for a moment and then dropped through. So we did complete the loop. But as we sort of hung at the top, all bits of dust and dirt came off the floor and sort of floated past our faces with hardly any airspeed on it at all. Then round it came the loop. And I noticed that the stick was shaking as we came up the bottom. And I thought, I shouldn't have done that to the station commander. So, yeah, not the best thing to do.
No.